Good afternoon. Welcome to our fireside chat featuring Lauren Fisher with Ernst & Young. I'm Sonya Gary, CEO of Diella Training Consultancy, and I'm your moderator for this session. So to give you a bit of background about myself, I have 20 years of experience working in the financial services industry across North America and Asia. So I use my expertise to partner with my clients to create innovative and impactful learning and development solutions that improve work performance. And so I will also add that for those who are visually impaired, I am wearing a red blazer and I have red glasses on. So hopefully that's helpful. So with that, let's turn our attention to Lauren Fisher. We are so excited to learn from you today. So please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Sonia. Hey, everyone. My name is Lauren Fisher, and I am a manager in the People Advisory Services practice at Ernst & Young, based in Atlanta, Georgia. I have over several years of experience implementing learning and development solutions for large companies going through ERP implementations globally. And for the visually impaired, I am wearing a plaid blazer and I have blonde hair. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Lauren. So for those who may not be aware, please share an overview of enterprise resource planning or ERP. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yep. So enterprise resource planning is basically a system that corporations use to run their organization. So for example, you may work for a company that utilizes SAP or Oracle. So everybody knows those systems hold everything from your payroll functions to HR to supply chain. Basically, it does everything for your organization. If you are like a warehouse company, it holds your inventory, it ships to customers, it also does your invoicing and everything. So yeah, basically these global corporations don't exist without enterprise resource planning.
Excellent. Excellent. So that really lets us know about the breadth of using this particular training product. So what are some practical examples? You gave us some high level, but can you give us some analogies around how you would demonstrate the impact of ERP on the operations?
Yep. So for example, now the client that I'm supporting, they are the world's largest farmer. And I've been working with them for the last couple of years. We are doing a 5-year global implementation, basically upgrading their current ERP system from SAP ECC, which is the older version of SAP, to now the new cloud version. And the biggest thing is their supply chain. So they always let us know, hey, if we can't ship out to our customers, the world doesn't eat. So that's something that we always keep in the back of our mind. So like that's a good analogy, especially like for training, because one thing that we always put emphasis into the training is, hey, you're an end user, so you might be customer service. At the end of the day, it's your job to make sure what those orders get sent out and make sure that customer gets their orders so what the world can eat. So you have to learn how to do your job, and we're going to make sure that you have the appropriate training as well as good training to make sure day one you're ready to do your job.
Wonderful. So that really sets the tone, because if we are not, if you all are not utilizing this particular strategy, then we're not receiving materials and products. So I can imagine during COVID, this was pretty important.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very important.
Tell us a little about that.
Yep. So everybody knows during COVID, literally the world stopped. So like I went from traveling every week to being on site with the client to working from home. And at the time we was getting ready to go live in May, and it was like, oh, we've never went live and not been in person. So this is not going to work. So one thing I always tell people about now, outside of the box training strategies, take it digital. We went virtual. So like we literally did a global implementation virtually from the comfort of our home. I was in Chicago at the time, making sure the system was up, making sure people had their training documentation available for them. At the same time, these people were like in Asia and Europe and stuff. So stuff like that is just letting you know, like, hey, the world can still go on through adversity and change.
Wonderful. Well, we really appreciate that and all of your effort to really think out of the box and ensure that you are being as efficient as possible. So, so speaking of efficiency, so if someone if someone were looking to employ this training, what type of efficiency gains do you think? You know, and this is from a layman who doesn't really understand ERP. How would they go about implementing this, and what type of efficiency gains would they see?
So they would go first by working with like a systems implementer. So everybody might be familiar with like your professional service firm. So like I work for Ernst and Young. We have competitors out there like Accenture and Deloitte. So these corporations hire us to come in and either implement new systems or refresh their existing systems. So from there, we do our training needs analysis. So like what type of training, how many end users? For example, my current client has over 30,000 global end users, and each year we're moving into a new region. So like right now we're focusing on Latin America. So that's a little under 10,000 end users. So we had to get the number of end users, who are those stakeholders, like what are their processes and stuff, just so we can actually effectively build this training for them. And then as far as like efficiency, we're doing it digitally. So one system we're using is Enable Now. So that's big right now in the SAP space because it's part of SAP and it works directly with their system. So like we're making sure like, hey, if you're in this system and you may not know how to do a purchase order in this new system because it looks different from what you're used to, we have a question mark that pops up to say, hey, show me how to do a purchase order. And like it walks them through that whole process. So the efficiency is basically training doesn't stop months before you're in this new system. You still have training on day one and after.
Got it. No, that's super insightful. You gave a lot of great examples. So, and I will also point out, if you all in the audience, if you have questions, feel free to utilize the Q&A feature to send those questions through to us, and we will get to them towards the end of the session. So thank you for that. So tell us a little bit, Lauren, about an employee success story. Maybe someone whose performance skyrocketed as a result of ERP training.
Yep. So last year I was actually in Europe for my project, and we were preparing training documentations and working with them as far as like trainer and actually sitting in on training. And it was one warehouse in particular, and it was like, oh, we don't do well with somebody just standing up and going through PowerPoint slides to teach them how to train. So I said, okay, so how do you learn? And that's like something that we always have to pay attention to in the L&D space is there's no such thing as one size fits all learning. So this group likes to be actually a day in the life. So I'm like, okay, we can take this directly to the floor. So like we rolled out computers and video and took them directly to the floor. We was asking people, okay, what is your job functionality? Somebody was like, oh, well, I'm on the forklift moving stuff from A to B. So I'm like, okay, pulled up your training. It literally walks them through a day in the life of their job and how they get to use the system functionality on their forklifts to do their job. So stuff like that actually helped them and just like reinforced everything. And then also printing out QRGs. So that was one thing I always like to leverage because, hey, you may not be by a computer all the time. You might be on the floor or walking around doing your job. So, hey, have this little quick to go guide of like training features and stuff to do your job better. So like once we did that and like we actually gave them a survey to see, hey, are you ready to go live? Do you feel more comfortable? using the system, and like literally the answers changed directly from when we first asked them were they comfortable, no, to like literally almost 100% turnover. Everybody was like, yeah, due to us switching how we trained them, they felt more comfortable now to do their job better.
And that's fantastic. And I think there's a lot of learning in there for the audience. It's ensuring that we can make adjustments on the fly based on the employee feedback,
Yep.
to ensure that they're connected with the learning, right?
Yep.
To make it more digestible for them to apply. So that application is key, especially
Yep.
when you're working in an environment where if you guys don't get things done, then we can't eat. So,
Exactly.
yes, excellent. So, a lot of insight that we can apply, a lot of takeaways there. So, um, let's think about uh, how can people who are interested in ERP go beyond like a one-time learning event to ensuring that the ERP is integrated into workflow. So how can we kind of change our thinking about that?
Basically, I always tell people you want to keep educating yourself on ERP. So basically, there's like hundreds of different ERP systems, and like right now, our biggest trend within that space is cloud. So I always tell people look at cloud-based ERP functionality. Like we're moving from like a lot of people doing stuff in Excel spreadsheets to like real-time data uploading, so we can actually see like where your product or stuff like that's going. So continue to educate yourself on these new offerings and stuff, and also know like what's out there. So like I'm big in the SAP space, but there's like other companies too. So like Oracle, see what Oracle is doing, like how can that better service not only you but your future clients, small scale or on the large scale. So like constantly evolve and just pay attention to these trends around you, because right now we're in this space where literally you can do everything from the comfort of your home. So always pay attention to trends that are focusing on that virtual space that we're currently in.
Gotcha. So just really understanding the technology that's out there that can help you do this better.
Yep.
Got it. Super helpful. So you have tons of experience. It's very clear that you are an expert in the space. You know how to get it done, and you are nimble and innovative. Um, can you tell us about a time that you experienced a challenge on this journey with ERP?
Yep. And I think everybody can relate to this. So, like, if you're ever hired by a company or something to help make their training better, the one thing I always hear and see is nobody really cares about training. So, for example, last year when we was creating training and we was actually trying to carve out time with our process leads and end users to make sure that they're adequately ready for training, it was like, oh, I'm focused on this, I'm focused on that. People always want to put technical stuff ahead of training. And I was like, okay, how do you know your technical stuff? Somebody has to what? Teach you. So that's stuff that we have to keep reiterating. So like one big thing that I'm always on is carving out time with your key counterpart. So like for example, if you're on like these big projects, you may hear like test cycles. So like people might be doing integration testing. Those people who are testing the system are also the same people who are helping you create this training for their team. So like work at the same time with them. Like, hey, I know you're testing right now, but we need to focus on training. So like just keep reiterating training to your stakeholders. Cause like, yeah, that's like literally the biggest challenge I've been facing like for years. People always want to say, oh, we could wait for training or whatever. And then all of a sudden you hear months later, oh, training could have been better. Or I felt like
Mm,
I didn't understand everything because we didn't put a lot of investment into training.
that is so true. That is such an excellent point.
Yeah.
And so it's training really before everything. So can you give people a little more color around what that initial sit down meeting, how does it look with your stakeholder when you're laying the groundwork for ERP? How does that conversation start and how do you get them invested at the beginning?
Yep. So just asking those key questions like, okay, what type of ERP system are we implementing? So you may hear some people just implement, oh, we're just upgrading our finance software. So like just one work stream versus now this company is upgrading their whole company. So it's all work streams. It's everybody from finance to supply chain to procurement. So I'm like, okay, how many end users? Is this global, regionalized, or central? So stuff like that, just to gauge first what type of training we're having to do. Another big thing, especially since we're in this global world now of training, oh, do you need stuff to be translated? That's big right now in the L&D space. Everybody doesn't speak English. So we have to meet them and translate this training content for them. So just asking those stakeholders and then giving them success stories of like, hey, this is what we done in the past. I feel that we can leverage X, Y, and Z to be able to help you and your organization. And then lastly, just continue to get that buy-in from them. Because if you don't have your stakeholder support, training is not going to go nowhere, because at the end of the day, they have to go back and relay this to their team saying, hey, we have to be trained on this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That was brilliant insight. So now that we've gotten stakeholder involvement, they're ready to go, they understand where we need to do. How do you then measure the impact? So aside from standard KPIs, how are you then measuring the success?
One thing I like to do, because you always hear people say, oh, just send out surveys or something. People really don't pay attention that much to a survey. Like you actually have to go ask people like, okay, how do you feel about training? Like, did you feel like you got anything value added? What could we have done better? Meet us like that. So just keep asking those questions to people. Also, in the system that we use for training, it gives us like reports. So like, for example, is one report that shows us, say it's a virtual user in California that took the training by themselves. It lets us know, oh, how long did they stay in the training? So like if this is a 4-hour training and they stayed 90 minutes, okay, I'm going to ask questions like, oh, did something come up in your work life? Did you have to pause training, or was training just really boring to you? So stuff like that helps us measure how good our training is.
That's really key information. So when you are, so you're looking at reports, you're engaging with individuals as need be based on what you see in the analytics. So how then are you sitting down with the client to really have that conversation around the impact and maybe things that went well, things that could have been different, and things to look forward to in the future? So that's something that we'd like to have some insight into as well.
Yep. So I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with agile methodology. So I'm big on working in sprints. And then, one thing with agile, you always do what? A retrospective at the end of your sprint just to see lessons learned and what went well. So like after each wave is what we call it. So like each region, we call it a wave to implement. So after each wave, we actually sit down with the client and go through a retrospective. We say, hey, we did 102 courses. This is how many people were trained, and then we break it down to like people who were trained in person versus virtual. We share insights. So like I said before, what was the average time people who were virtual spent in the training? And then we'll bring in more insights like, oh, here's your survey. This is people who are ready to be fully trained, or these are people who adapted to the training and the change and are ready for like day one. So literally just sitting down and letting them know that. And then also, what went well. And then also giving them that time, oh, what didn't go well and how can we improve? So like, for example, last year we found out what didn't go well was when we identified trainers, the trainers had dual roles. So for example, we had people who were not only training, but they was also working with technical teams to make sure the system was running. So they was 50-50. So they couldn't devote a lot of time to make sure their end users were properly trained. So that was something we're taking into consideration now. Like, hey, let's get people to train these people in your warehouses who are not testing. And the same thing with translations, because not only are we creating this training documentation, we're also translating it. So somebody has to review the translation to make sure, hey, can I understand this version of Spanish? Like, does it make sense to me to be able to do my job? So stuff like that. So like we took a lot of that into consideration, and now we just implemented everything. So fingers crossed when we start training in the fall that everything is working according.
Wonderful. That's super. It's super detailed, and I am curious about the regional differences. So, of course, you mentioned the translation. So, language is something to watch out for. But have you observed any other regional differences in terms of implementing ERP?
Yep. So right now, since we're focusing in Latin America, we're actually focusing on 12 countries, and each country is different. So we have like one main course. So like I have a course called Transportation Management. So basically it's how to ship to customers. Each country ships a different way. Each country
Mm-hmm.
has a different import export form that we have to take into consideration. So basically that's what me and my team is working on now. Like we don't want to make training too long, because if it's too long, you're not going to comprehend what you need to comprehend. But we also need to take into this consideration like, hey, I'm in Bolivia. I do something different from somebody in Brazil. So those are like those regional things we have to take into consideration. And then also regional dialects. So that goes back to translations. For example, last year I was working in France. We found out that in France, they don't call warehouses, they call them stores. So in the training documentation that we created, we called everything warehouse, and then it translated into warehouse. So we had to go back and change that. So, like, yeah, it's basically just knowing your audience.
Yep, absolutely. That is super key. So we should be thinking about these regional differences as we employ our training strategy. So that's a good thing for us to watch out for. Various regional differences, and ensuring that we are making adjustments as required along the way. So when you think about post training, so you mentioned you're agile, you are making changes as need be. But once you're done with that training, have you ever had situations where you had to do any follow up training? Are there certain things that we should be looking out for in that space?
Yep. So we did training for our first wave in 2021. It was North America. Found out after October, they was like, yeah, it was a small subset group that wasn't properly trained. They needed to be retrained. And we found out that basically the training documentation was not relevant to their job positions and everything. So we literally had to go back and get with those key people and find out exactly what they needed to be trained on, redo the training, and make sure we can properly train them so they can do their job. So like we literally had to carve out time to make sure, hey, we redid your training, but also here's adequate time for you to be able to sit in training and be able to process this for your new job functionality and everything. And I see that happens a lot. And I think that goes
Yep.
back to having that good relationship with your stakeholders, because at the end of the day, your stakeholders are also your spokespeople for the people who are being trained. So we have to be on one accord exactly to find out, hey, what do your people need to be trained on, so we can deliver that adequate training to them.
Yep. That's a huge takeaway. So um, if someone is interested to go down a similar path as you, working in ERP, learning more about these technologies, what are some steps that they should be taking at a foundational level?
Foundational level, utilize your resources. So, for example, I always tell people, especially people who always ask me all the time, like, what is SAP? How can I get into SAP? Look at places like Coursera or edX or it's another one to Udemy, and take
Mm-hmm.
those free SAP courses. Like, learn the basis of SAP. Like right now, the biggest thing in SAP is SAP S4 HANA, which is the cloud-based version of SAP. And then from there, just start learning like different things. So like for me, my background before I got into the learning and development space, I was actually on the technical side. So I was configuring SAP for clients. So that actually helped me switch over to learning and development better because I knew the system. So like I knew what people needed to be trained on. So I always tell people, even though you're in that L&D space, it doesn't hurt to know technical stuff because you're like a salesperson. You have to be able to know the system that you're training people on.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, that's some really helpful. You gave a lot of great resources. So checking out some of the products that are out there, like Udemy, that can really help you with understanding some of the technical tools out there. So what I love about this conversation, Lauren, is that for someone who may not have the technical experience with the cloud systems, you gave a lot of practical insights for learning development professionals, full stop, from the beginning of the journey with your stakeholders, ensuring that you're engaged, that they understand what you're trying to accomplish, that they understand the goals, that you are creating the correct training materials, that you have the right way in which you want to deliver that training, adjusting on the fly, so thinking outside of the box and being creative. And then also in terms of regional differences, these are all things, and lastly, measuring the success of the training program. These are all things that we should be thinking about when we are engaging with our clients and we're starting out a training program at the ground level. So I really appreciate you, and I'm sure the audience appreciates all of the insight that you shared. Do you have any final thoughts before we go to questions?
Yeah, final thoughts also is collaborate. So I have a team right now of probably 13, and we're global. So like I have people onshore, which is people based here in the United States, but also have people that are based in India. And then we're going to have people based in Poland. So like just working with a different variety of people to get your deliverables done, but also play on people's strengths too. So like, for example, I have one team member who is great with data analytics. So I literally let him run with our deliverables as far from like a data insight, and like take what we're doing in training and translate that into data that he can put into like Power BI and ADO to be able to show that to our leadership to say like, hey, this is how we're coming with training. So basically it takes our words and visuals and put it like into data so they can be like, oh, how are we on track for training and stuff? Because now we have people's attention and they're focusing on training. So yeah, I always tell people, play up on people's strengths, have a good teaming environment. So like, for example, my team, we have a Microsoft team, making sure we're creating that learning and development, always carve out that time for us to learn stuff. So I'm always bringing people on my team who may not have my knowledge, but one thing my director always tells me is like, oh, make sure you're training people as you go. So yeah, I'm always making sure that, hey, I'm making sure you know what I know so you can go and be great at other places too. So I always tell people, keep that in mind.
Yeah, think about the team. So going beyond just you as an individual contributor, with you utilizing ERP, but thinking about your team dynamics and how you can develop and leverage your team. That's excellent advice.
Yep.
Great. So I will like to turn it over to questions. So for those who don't work in the ERP space, what advice do you have for people to upskill or cross skill into this space?
That goes back to finding education online. So like go to Udemy, just type in ERP. I still think they have like what is ERP or ERP 101. Take that and look. Another good site I like to use is called erpgreat.com. That's good, especially like if you want to learn more about SAP, they literally break it down for you.
Excellent. Lots of valuable resources. Any other questions?
I see someone wrote, can you circle back and expand on SAP? So SAP is probably the world's most known ERP system. It actually stands for Systems Application Processing. And a little nerd fun fact, it was actually created by 3 former IBM consultants in the 60s. And now it's literally its own company. A lot of companies use SAP. So like, for example, Johnson & Johnson, the world's largest healthcare company, uses SAP. Even the NFL uses SAP. So like you may be at a stadium and you'll see like SAP commercials. You may not know what it is, but you'll see it. I even saw an SAP ad in the airport last week. So yeah, so SAP is just an ERP system. You can do everything in it from like HR functionality, payroll, to supply chain and more.
Brilliant. Yes, and I do see those SAP posters in stadiums, so for sure. So we have a question. Could you repeat the website just mentioned, please? I think it was erpgreat.com.
Yep. So there's, erpgreat.com.
erpgreat.com. So everyone, please take a note of that. We have another question now. Our company just transitioned over to SAP, and now I need to learn more as the learning and development head there and see how I can put myself in the process. So do you have any advice?
Yep. So Marla, first thing, let's connect outside. So reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to share all of my insight about SAP. Definitely want to know exactly like what parts of SAP. Was it SAP HANA or like was it just certain other systems? But also you can actually go to sap.com. They have a lot of free learning and solutions available for people to get upskilled on. And I will also check to see if your company, since y'all just transitioned to SAP, has access to SAP Learning Hub. Is basically a site within SAP. You can go in and it would teach you everything about the different offerings of SAP.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. So we have another question. In your experience, what are some common challenges or hurdles organizations face when implementing an ERP system, and how can they overcome them effectively?
A big one is trying to implement too fast. So I'm a consultant. So I've been in the consulting space for almost a decade. I've been on projects where companies take a year to implement, which is pretty good, especially if it's a big corporation. And I've seen companies that want to implement SAP in 5 months and then they implode on go live because it's 5 months to implement a big system like SAP. And then also another challenge is knowing what to implement. So like I said before, there's hundreds of ERP systems. I always tell companies, especially if they're still like in that strategy phase, research. Like don't just go with SAP because everybody else is on SAP. Your company may be better for Oracle or say like Blue Yonder or something. So like know what fits your organization. I always tell people this because you don't want to spend X amount on something that's too big and too large to implement when you needed something on a smaller scale. So yeah, know your products, research. I always tell people definitely research. That's a big challenge. And then another one is basically not having the adequate amount of resources. So like if you're implementing a big ERP implementation and say it's global, you need people to help implement. So like right now with my client, you need people in every work stream. Like you need key people in supply chain who know your processes. You need finance people. You need intercompany people. You need people in different regions, like I said earlier, because like we didn't know at first Bolivia had different requirements until like they brought that up. So just basically having those people, because you literally have to have like what we call workshops, and that's where you find out these questions to know exactly how can you solution these ERP systems to fit your client's needs, but also your organization's needs.
Well said. And one thing that's really crystal, based on what you just shared, is that communication
Yes.
over communication. So from the ground level and throughout the process, communication is key and it's baked into, it sounds like, every part of your process.
Yes.
So that's some helpful advice for you, Dina Beavers. Thank you for your question. So I think though there are no other questions in the chat. Um, if I may, I have a question for you, Lauren.
Okay.
Just if there's something, if you were to, because you transitioned from the technical side into the learning and development space. So if you were to look back, and if there's something that you could say to your younger self about your journey, what would you tell her? What could she do differently to have transitioned into L&D?
I would tell her first, listen to your gut the first time. So, like, I was kind of late, even though I knew I wanted to transition more into learning and development as well as change management, because technically, some companies learning falls under change management. And I took my time with it. So, I'm like, always listen to your instinct. Like, if you know you're not so passionate about something anymore, that letting you know, hey, you need to get uncomfortable. Because I always tell that. I tell that to my sisters now. I was like, yo, if you're getting burned out at work or you feel like you're stagnant, you need to take a step back and actually see, one, do you like what you're doing? If not, what do you want to do? Because like you may find something within your current job. So like, for example, I knew I wanted to do learning, but I was on the technical side. I got on a project where they didn't have the budget to hire somebody to come in and do training. So I volunteered to create the training. I was like, I'm already building the system, so I might as well create the training and help
Yep.
deliver the training. So that helped me get into training and learning development, because they'd be like, oh, you need experience. Hey, here's my experience. I stepped up and delivered training to 500 end users. And then I kept doing that until I was able to be afforded the opportunity to fully transition into the L&D space.
Love it. That is so, just a lot of fortitude, a lot of
Yep.
grit to get things done, and listening to yourself, listen to your intuition. That's a great
Yes.
one. That's a great one. Um, so lastly, I will ask about mentorship. Did you have any mentors, or even sponsorship? Did you have any mentors or sponsors along the way?
Yep. So when I first got into consulting, I got put on a project. You might be familiar with the retail company LL Bean. So you know they're big into like the camping space and plaid and stuff. So yeah, I was working with them doing functional work, but it was a woman on my project who needed help also with like training and stuff. And I was like, oh hey, I have the bandwidth to help you. I'm interested in training. So she took me under her wing, and I was just telling her like, hey, eventually I want to do what you do. So how can I get to you? So she just shared her career path and kept giving me insight and everything. And we worked together for a year. And like after that, I just kept taking her words to heart. and was able to fully transition into the L&D space. We actually still keep in contact now.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So pearls of wisdom, reach out, develop those relationships. You never know what you will gain along the way. So really good insight there.
Yep.
So Lauren, I thank you for sharing your time, for sharing your expertise, for sharing your journey with us. I certainly walked away from this session with a lot of knowledge, and you gave us a lot of resources to think about to help us on our journey with ERP training. So thank you again, and I will end the session with letting you all know that an email will be distributed. It will be a survey. We ask for your feedback, please, what you enjoyed about this conference, this session, and what things we can do differently or better for the next one. So thank you so much for your time.